Hello, everybody, and welcome to Todd and Shane's Cloudy Podcast number 419, recorded live January 23rd, 2019. I am your host, Todd, and we have a special guest this week. Special guest, would you like to tell us, introduce yourself?
Look here, just because I have not been able to attend these shenanigans the last couple weeks, so one of the things you learn is absence makes the heart grow fonder. And so these poor people have had to live with the show with only you and then with you and that Mark weirdo. So they are dying for me. I can do no wrong in today's episode. That's how bad they are craving me returning to the show.
So I have two comments on that. Number one is I doubt that they think they're any more fond of you than they were, a month ago or whatever. And number two, that bar is so high or so low, like how fond they were of you before and just like a little more fond. I don't know. But it's good to have you back.
Well, thank you. It really is appropriate I showed up for 419, right? Because that is authentication timeout. So, me being gone had timed out. So
had to come back
to re-authenticate,
refresh your token, then you can go out for a couple of weeks again.
Yeah, pretty much. I think the whole month of March I'm on the road, so.
Yep. So did you see, so if you haven't, don't do it now, but did you see what last week's HTTP code was?
I did not.
So as I'm getting ready, and of course, last week when I had Mark on, I was hosting with XSplit and all that. So fighting all those battles and what audio doesn't work, all that. And so I tell Mark, we're already on Skype and I'm fighting XSplit. I'm like, hey, look up HTTP code 418. So I'm doing my thing. And Mark replies to me, I'm a little teapot. And I say, are you short and stout? And like neither one of us knew what was going on. But HTTP code 418 is, I'm a teapot. And so... But of course, that made no sense to me. So I thought it was, yeah. So HTTP code 418 is some April Fool's joke about a web-enabled coffee maker, and so they put an HTTP code that if you tried to send coffee maker commands to something that wasn't a coffee maker, it could reply with 418. I'm a teapot, but it was just this thing like I wasn't looking at the screen, and he's like, I'm a teapot. I'm like, that is great, Mark. I can only imagine how excited. I had no idea what was going on.
Yeah, sometimes we forget that this internet that holds the whole universe together at this point was made by a bunch of nerds in a room, and they do things like, you know what, we want to have code 418 be I'm a teapot because we can, and
because
no
that makes me laugh. Yeah. So that was so authentication timeout is much less funny than I'm a teapot, but it's good to know that code is there should I ever need it.
Well, I wonder what next week's will be, right? I mean, all the potential jokes. But all of those jokes came in probably after the web code was established, so it's probably going to be something really boring and mundane. Tune in next week; it'll be exciting.
I think that joke has been around longer. I don't know. We'll find out. Yeah, I'm not going to look it up. I'm not going to spoil. Nobody in the chat room spoil it for us. Don't put it in there.
Todd will find out when he does the intro, and I chime in with some random joke next week, and it'll be like, womp, womp.
Some Dr. Dre quote or Snoop Dogg or something. For production, I think I forgot to publish last week's podcast, so. I will do that today. I will get those files out there. But it's not because of the fine folks at Syskit. They've been working on great stuff. Mark, you'll be happy to know, Shane, that in your absence, Mark mocked me because of the Syskit logo and the amateurish way that it looks. So
well, I'd like to point out that it's been up there on the wall so long. Right? A few episodes ago, we worked on the taping the bottom, right, to get the shadows off the bottom. But it's a cheap piece of printer paper, and so now it's starting to curl on the left edge or the right edge, I guess. But that's I just want to point out that our paper might need to be replaced. Might need to do a new paper printout of it soon.
Yeah, you're right. It's an old piece of printer paper that's been hanging there for years now. So I mean, we can only expect so much from this poor piece of paper.
Yeah, well, that's. But I mean, one day you're going to add one, and it's going to be such a non-event, right? You're going to put the real one up there. I'm not even going to refer to it anymore. I'll be like, Syskit who?
Yeah. So Stephen Colbert, I can't remember. He took a break. He took a month off or something here recently, and he grew a beard. And when he came back, he had this big beard, and it looked horrible. I hated it, but I don't like beards as it is. But he talked about for weeks how his wife hated that beard and how he thought it was great, but she was making him shave it. And then he came back, the first night when he came back with the beard gone, he was talking about, he's like, my wife who's been ragging on me to get rid of this beard for weeks, I shave it, took her 2 hours to notice it was gone. And it's just funny how our minds are. I can totally get it. Because like when the show started, I'm like, man, there's something different. I can't quite put my finger on it. The beard's gone.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. I mean, I'm mostly certain my wife probably doesn't look at me every 2 hours. So
Not if she doesn't have to, I don't imagine. Yeah.
I understand. So
I don't.
So speaking of the charity of our wives, actually putting up with ourselves, it sounds like that finally we've reached the point in the year where you had a birthday a few days ago. Bleh. But I can now give to charity again because your charity drive is over.
Yep.
But you can tell me about how all these people did with their charity contributions.
Yeah, so I think we've got the highest total. I don't have all the previous totals, but we raised $5,400 this year, or this month. I guess it's the month between Lori and I's birthday. Yeah, $5,400. So as sticking with tradition, I think this is the 9th year that we've done this. Lori had a card, has everybody's names and all that. I'll be sending them all emails. But I did not get the card before this episode in the mail. So I don't know that I ever have. So she scanned a copy and sent it to me. So I've got all the names and the charities, lots of great stuff in there. I was a little nervous. I brought this up last week and Mark was mentioning, he's like, so any charity? I'm like, absolutely. He's like, so what happens if it was like my 40th high school class reunion and they did a big fundraiser and I gave them a big chunk of money for our school? Does that count? I'm like, oh, because we just talked about how I would match it. So, but he apparently did not throw that in, thank goodness. But yeah, $5,400. So I'll tell my wife the good news, and we'll figure out a charity to match that with. So thanks to everybody out there again. If you donated, I will send you a personal email and show my appreciation for that.
Very nice of you. Well, I mean, the good news is that $5,400 you had tucked away to go to the Super Bowl. Oh, I'm sorry, the big game. I'm not allowed to say that.
Right now, we're gonna get sued. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, so you
the superb owl.
But so it was saved for the big game, and so you're not going to the big game because your Kansas City team, that I shouldn't say their name either, didn't win. So
that is unfortunate. Yeah,
it
was.
Sorry.
Yeah, they held. So yeah, for those of you that don't listen to the podcast, I'm a Chiefs fan. My wife and I have gone to the couple of playoff games. They held their own, but they did not prevail. But to make sure we got our money's worth, they did go into overtime, which was nice. But yeah, they did not. They didn't make it. They made it as close as they could to get into Atlanta. So maybe next year. Yeah. Very sad.
I mean, the best part of overtime, I'm certain, though, was the fact that you're probably freezing to death. I mean, it was a little chilly, I think, right?
It was. So I think when the game started, it was 19 degrees, and it got colder. It didn't get horrible. I think it got down to like 14 degrees, something like that. And we happened to be on the side that the wind was coming from, so we didn't get as much of the wind. And also, the only way that I will go to games at Arrowhead, because it's not a dome, there's 3 rings at Arrowhead, the bottom ring and the middle ring and the top ring, though that makes it obvious. The middle ring, you can go inside. So there's like an inside portion that's heated and all that. So that's the only place we'll ever go, so that when I get cold, I can go inside.
So the club level, as they sometimes refer to that?
Yeah, probably so. That seems a lot more hoity-toity than I feel that it is, but yeah.
I can see you walking on your pinky in the air. Like,
drinking my hot chocolate with my pinky up because my Tootsies are cold.
Yeah, I've had hot chocolate with you in Paris before. I saw you. Todd sat down, and just grabbed this little hot chocolate at Starbucks. Yep. And
cross my leg very dignantly and sip my hot cocoa in Paris in the Starbucks across the street from the Starbucks.
Yes. Made some Devil Wears Prada, reference to the mean lady, and it was great.
Yeah, that was it was a good time, but it was very cold. And the other thing that we did is we always get seats. We're in row 7, but it's kind of under the overhang, so if it is happening to rain or snow, we get less of that. But we were bundled up. We had blankets and hand warmers and toe warmers and hats and more hats, and it was pretty chilly.
Oh, it doesn't sound very fun. Well, condolences. I mean, my Bengals have been done for like a month, so.
Yeah, I couldn't even remember if Cincinnati had a team anymore. It's been so long since.
Well, we don't have a coach still, so maybe we don't. Maybe we're just gonna fold the team up. Yeah. I don't think anybody here would care.
But no, it was a good time. It was. I liked it. It was fun. I wish they'd have won, but it was a good time.
Good.
So you've been gone for a couple of weeks. What crazy things have you been working on? Normally we talk about stuff we've been done, but you haven't been around. So what have you been doing?
Well, I was traveling for the PowerAppsy stuff as always, but I thought, maybe since to try and rein us back in first, we'll go all the way back to our roots. I had the good fortune earlier this week to do some SharePoint work.
Huh.
And so one of my customers has wanted to be able to build a template site out in his SharePoint Online tenant and then, take that and apply it so he could use that template over and over and over again for a bunch of different site collections. And, if you're old school like us, you remember the days of save site as templates, very trivial task.
Yep. No, and I think last week, Mark and I talked about site definitions and site templates and how site definitions were in the templates folder and
Oh, crazy. Well, unfortunately with SharePoint Online, they got rid of save site as template. They got rid of save list as template. They said, nah, no more fun. So what you have to do is you have to use good old PowerApps, or not Power. I can't say PowerShell anymore. I always say PowerApps. You have to use PowerShell, the PnP PowerShell. And so there is a commandlet called get provisioning templates. And so you can take that commandlet and you point it at your site collection. And it's got a whole bunch of switches for different handlers and things like that. But honestly, I just used it straight up. So I just said, put it out to an XML file, stepped away, came back about 2-3 minutes later, and it had sucked it all down into one XML file that basically said, here's the formula for recreating what this particular site collection looks like.
Yeah.
So then as I was kind of messing with it, I found out that it doesn't by default take things like folders and it doesn't like go into the contents of document libraries, for example.
Correct.
So there is another command called add PnP list folders to provisioning template, which you can then point at a list instance in that particular site collection and then tell it, and this is the XML file to go append to, and it'll go and interrogate that folder or that document library, get all the folder structure out of it, and then write that into the XML file or the formula file of, how to rebuild this thing.
Yeah.
So after a little bit of, cursing and stuff and kind of figuring out exactly the syntax, because all of these commandlets have a lot of different parameters, right? Because they want to make it as flexible as possible.
Yep.
But I got through it and I had a nice happy XML file. So I said, all right, let me go create a new site collection. Once you have a new site collection, like it wasn't a blank site collection, like I did a new group site because that's really the default these days. And I know you're a bigger fan of groups than I am, and I'm accepting of them, so don't get me wrong. But so then you use apply PnP provisioning template, and you say, here's my XML file. And then in my instance, I used clear navigation because I didn't want to have a bunch of duplicates from the old navigation to the new. So it wipes out all navigation and then uses the XML file to build in a new navigation. In pretty short order, I had taken his stuff and made a template that he could reuse now. So kind of excited.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I think so. The provisioning engine that the PnP has been, there've been a couple of different provisioning engines out there, and it's kind of matured enough that it's usable. I tried to use it a couple of years ago, and it was just not solid. But I think the testament that even you could get it to work gives hope to anybody out there that wants to try it. But I guess the thing is, so for folks like you and I that have done this for a while, we need to sort of clear our head of any preconceptions and just forget about site templates and site definitions and save site and all that kind of stuff and just kind of start anew because it does things a little differently. For instance, like you mentioned, you have to create a site and then you stamp this provisioning template on top of it. And it really is, that XML file and that provisioning engine really is a declarative set of instructions. So it's not stamping out a copy. It's saying, I've got this site and I need to go in and add this list and change this setting. And because of that, you can do the things like you can append the stuff onto them. You can run the same template multiple times on a site. You can add another template later. And there's just all these great things because it's not a cookie cutter thing now, right. Which is what you and I are used to from the old days. And there's just a bunch of things. So you just need to forget all that you know and use it. But I've used it for a couple of customers. It's pretty good. Last week, Mark and I were talking about site scripts and site definitions, which is the official Microsoft way to do a bunch of this stuff. So you can get a lot of options. You can get overcome by options. So you got to be careful about that.
Yeah, and that was really the problem I had every time I would look at this. There was just so much content out there, so much old content, so much undated content. We know how we feel about undated content on this show. But yeah, and I think you said it best there that when you go into this, you've just got to wipe your memory. You got to use the neuralizer to remove all remembrance of how it used to work and just go in and look and see how it works now. Because if you bring baggage, it just makes it that much harder. You're like, well, it should do this. No. Read what it says it does. Yeah. Accept what it does. Don't say it should. It should. Don't make assumptions.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it'll do this, even though they say that it won't do that. But I think, and it's not in the notes, but this is another of many, like the list is as long as my arm, of functionality that sort of exists with the Microsoft official modules and the product, but that the PnP team has ran with. So this is one, because again, we've had site scripts and site designs for a while, but they've never been exactly, and you had to use Power. I mean, it's kind of ugly. The PnP team said, forget about that. We're going to do this provisioning engine thing, and we got this. This last week, I've been working on trying to populate custom user profile properties in SharePoint Online.
Okay.
There is, it's not, so it's a property that exists, and it exists in Azure AD, but doesn't get synced to the user profile service. And there's no, you can't get in and do the things like we're used to being able to do on-prem. So Microsoft has a way that you can upload a file that will do that, and it's horrible. You have to create this JSON file, and you have to do this thing, and it's ugly. And I couldn't get it to work with the default stuff. So I'm reading the Microsoft documentation, and it references things that don't exist, and it's undated. I mean, there's just all, or it was dated, but it was anyway, had a lot of trouble. And so I went into one of the Slack channels I'm in and mentioned, has anybody done this? I'm not even getting a log file. I can't do whatever. And one of the folks, Michael Svensson on the PnP team is like, well, yeah, you can use that. But last month I just added a commandlet that does all this. So try that. And sure enough, the first time I ran it, off it went. And I'm like, oh, thank God. It was done. And so I did a thing where like I opened up a Premier support ticket with Microsoft, and I opened it up like I had not yet exhausted all of my own troubleshooting on the default stuff, but I know how these Premier cases go. I knew it was going to take a while. So that Premier case still has not been resolved. I submitted it over a week ago, and I've made no progress with them at all. But yeah, so I mentioned it. The PnP had the command. It's up there. It works.
Do you know what the command was? Do you remember what it was?
To do the user profile stuff?
Yeah, Kyle in the chat room is... you've piqued his interest. He wants to know details. And while you're looking for that, so... and that's one of the challenges also, though, right, is PnP especially is so fast changing, which, goodness, we all know Office 365 is as a whole. But when I was first looking up my folder problem where I wasn't getting the folders, I went and like my first search returned something from 2017 that said, just not supported, you can't do it. And so, but thankfully they had dated that particular piece of content. And so I didn't give up, and I went and looked, and it turned out that in, some point in 2018, they added those capabilities. So it's just once again that reminder that why dates are so important around technical content. But as Todd found out, he had exhausted almost everything he'd come up with, and then there's some random guy in Slack channels like, oh yeah, by the way, there's a commandlet now. It's hot off the presses. It'll burn you if you touch it, but it's working, and that's one of the big challenges that we have as SharePoint Online, Office 365 administrators is the pace of change is so fast that you can't just give up because you can be like, oh look, it says no right there. You got to figure out, was it no a month ago, or is it a no an hour ago? Where are we really at? And is there 5 other ways to do this thing?
Yeah. And the command that I'm using, and again, Michael Svensson gets all the props for this. The command that I was using, again, it's PnP PowerShell, is new PnP UPA bulk import job. And then there's another command like get PnP UPA bulk import status. So one's to submit the job, and then one's to run through and see what it's doing. Because it takes a while. I mean, half hour.
Well, and great. We just lost Kyle. He is not going to pay any more attention. He's in the chat room. He's like, see you guys.
Signed out. He's off to the... yeah. And it's funny. So it's just, I can't say enough good things about Michael Svensson. The Microsoft one, you have to create this JSON file, and you have to upload it to a document library, and then you have to connect, and you have to tell the thing where the file is in SharePoint Online and do all these crazy things. Michael's commandlet, you just give it a local file, it uploads it to SharePoint for you, and then submits the job from the file that it uploaded. I mean, it just, it holds your hand, pats you on the head. It's so much nicer.
Todd's romantic moments with PnP PowerShell.
And so I've been doing a lot of great PowerShell stuff lately. So there was that, and then this process takes a while, and it kind of moves through some steps. So then I wrote some PowerShell to loop through, and it pulls the status every 30 seconds. Okay, it's queued, it started, it finished. So then, it's this whole idea, and it's something that Don Jones had been preaching about PowerShell forever, be the tool maker. So it's not an, I got it to work. Like I created the file, I uploaded it, the properties were there. I could have just, 14 pages of documentation, some random PowerShell, but I want to be the tool maker. So I started packaging it so that somebody else could have a chance to be able to, get anything from this. And so again, it's, doing the do while loops and trying to, it's good fun. Loved it.
That's that guy that says don't use write host, right? I have no respect for his thoughts. So.
Yep. But yeah, good stuff. So yeah, the PnP PowerShell can't rave about them enough.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll be honest, I was shocked that I figured it out in the amount of time that I did. So if I can do it, as Todd said, any of you can do it as well. So
my cat's done it in the time since we talked about it.
Yeah. And then my next thought though is, can I take this, and so back to being the tool maker, can I take this concept and go apply it to a flow? Can I get flow to run it so then I can just make a Power App button that my customer presses every time he wants to stamp out a new one a site from this template?
Yeah, I think you can, because you can run PowerShell with Flow. You can fire up those little virtual environments, and so I assume you can add the PowerShell or the PnP commandlet locally, kick it off.
So, I mean, it'd probably be 6 or 9 months before I get to it, but that's my my next thought of where this will go. So.
Yeah, no, it's great stuff. I love it. Big props to the PnP team.
So, well, speaking of my dearly beloved PowerApps, right? So I don't have to try and say PowerShell anymore. Now I can just say PowerApps, a word that rolls off my tongue. So with PowerApps, they shipped some new functionality last Thursday, which was really outstanding because they shipped it late in the day Thursday. So I was teaching a PowerApps app in a day course as a free program Microsoft puts on. And there I am, Friday morning teaching. I'm like, here, now you add this control, and it was completely different. I'm like, not again, guys.
Microsoft.
That is the second time they've gotten me. I don't know if I ever told the story, but when I was recording that edX course, so I spent like 5 days in studio, in front of like the bright, crazy cameras, mid-demo there. Literally, I had checked the previous night. That morning, I was, I think, the first person in the world to ever see this new option show up, and I just rolled with it. I just made up, I guessed what it did based on the name and just plowed right through it. But that's the joy of being what we do now, right? Is change happens very fast.
Yes, it does.
But no, the updates in PowerApps, they're pretty good. What they were about, it was kind of two sets. One was making it easier to work with the gallery control and the forms control. And it's one of those things that if you've been doing galleries and form controls for a long time, you're like, oh my God, I have to relearn how to do this thing. But if you're new to it, it makes a lot more sense and it's a lot better interface. And, we have to remind ourselves, even though some of us have been doing PowerApps and Flow for over a year now, maybe a couple years.
A year. Holy cow.
Most of the world has not gotten here yet. So they're still making these, updates to the usability type of stuff that make it tougher for us, but is better for the long run for the product's health. So glad they did it. So there was that. And then if you're using CDS, the Common Data Service, or CDS for apps, I think is its big fancy name. So the Common Data Service, they keep investing a lot there, right? They want that to be the #1 platform or data storage option for PowerApps, and they're all in on that. So they continue to roll out new features. So they rolled out a whole nother set here. They took some of the connector stuff that was in preview and moved it up the line. They've added some different ways to handle like one-to-many relationships without a bunch of code, which today we just write a bunch of code to work around.
Excellent.
So yeah, so a bunch of updates there from the team, and it just wears me out, the pace of change.
Yeah, no, it's good. I've had it too, and I've had the updates happen so frequently that I mostly do when possible, and I understand that with yours it's not always possible, but when possible, when I'm doing talks, I use screenshots or videos instead of doing it live. Not because I'm afraid of doing it live. You and I failed on stage live a dozen times. It doesn't faze me anymore, but just things change between the night before when we go through our slides and the next morning when we present them. So I want to be able to tell a coherent story.
Yeah. And I struggle with that because I think it's mostly my laziness, if we're being honest. But almost all of the PowerApps and Flow content that I teach today, even the SharePoint stuff forever, right? I like to just walk in the room, be like, here's a slide that introduces me.
Yep.
And now I'm going to switch over to the browser and we're just going to play for the next, whatever, right? And I've got it scripted in my head, but I would really struggle with the more mature option, which is to pre-record and to do. I think you're more correct, especially in this age of, doing things against the internet all the time. But I just couldn't do it, I don't think.
Yeah, and you and I have very stark differences in how we approach those things, and I think neither one of us is entirely correct. So I think it works out well that we can strike that balance, because I get all freaked out if we don't have it in place, and you're like, "What? We go on stage. We've got over an hour before we go on stage. What's the?" So I mean, we meet someplace in the middle. I think the demo thing works really well because it's very flexible, and you can kind of go with the flow. For me, I find it tough to stay within time boundaries and hit all the things that I want to hit. So for me, I need that structure. But there's certainly value to just doing all demos. I got nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, it is tough though, but especially being the internet control being our master at this point.
Oh,
right? That is so scary. I mean, we used to carry around these massive laptops so we could at least run the whole virtual environment right there. That bit us in the butt a few times too, But now, if the conference internet's not working, my sessions are just going to get zeros. If they're like, hey, we got no internet, I'm going to be like, I can tell cow jokes. That's all I got.
I got 7 minutes of cow jokes. It's really 3 minutes of cow jokes, but I tell them over and over again.
I pause for laughter, and if you don't laugh, I keep pausing. So
I'm not going to talk until you guys laugh. Yeah, it's tough, and that's the screenshots and all that. But it's fun. I like the new stuff that they're adding. It's good. I was terrified of it, but I think they've stabilized the platform enough now that it doesn't bite us so much.
Yeah. Dan in the chat room's trying to be all cool. Like, I do a bunch of cool screenshots so that everybody can see my stuff, but then I can also demo. Mm-hmm. No one likes you. Pick a side.
We asked everybody, Dan. No one likes you. So you got a thing and a note about the Azure Blob Store. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so this is one of those things I've been meaning to look at literally since March of last year. Finally got to it this month. It's January.
No rush.
No rush. But so, one of the big challenges we've had in the PowerApps space, and really in any of these spaces, is storing content, right? We know that the amount of content stored on the internet just exponentially keeps growing and growing and growing.
I think it's doubled since the podcast started, if I know my stats right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're probably right. But the with all that content, when I start talking to people about building apps, they're like, oh, well, I'm just going to throw it out in SharePoint, or I'm just going to throw it out in SQL, right? And I can tell you guys from hands-on experience, there is nothing worse than trying to store blobs, image files, that type of stuff inside of SQL. There is not a thing on the planet that is slower.
Well, or the story we told when we did the PowerApp session at SP TechCon, storing that image in SharePoint, which then needs to store it in. So it's like, how many layers do you want between your application and the thing that it's trying to, how many middlemen do you want in there?
Exactly. So finally did a little research, and one of the great features of Azure, which we all know Azure has a bunch of great features, is the Azure Blob Storage. So you go out to Azure, you can create an Azure storage account, and then there's different types of storage options. But the one that we're using in the PowerApp space is the Blob Storage provider. And so with that, now I can basically, if I add that to my PowerApps app, there's a function for just writing that file straight out there.
Sweet.
And then I can grab the file back with a function. Or if you go in and mess with the different security settings and stuff like that, I don't know how far in the rabbit hole we want to get here, but you can actually make it so that it's a publicly accessible URL.
Okay.
Or so when you upload an image to the blob storage, it automatically gets a public URL. It's whether or not that public URL is allowed to be accessed. You can generate a query string, which is a key, right? So imagine, a query string that's 275 characters. So then what you can do is you can make the images not publicly accessible, but accessible if you have the proper URL plus this key embedded in the query string.
Gotcha.
So then, now, you're able to, with that full 800 character URL, you can send it off to somebody and they can access the file, no authentication, no nothing. They just need that key, and you can time bomb those keys. So you can generate them and say, this is good for a day, a week, a month, a year. But I have been playing with that, and I have just been super impressed where this Azure Blob Storage, which I think starts at like 6 cents a gig a month, which is pretty much free.
Yeah.
Has been really powerful for enabling my apps to start worrying about things like storing files efficiently and things like that.
Yeah. Saving state, things like that. And
So the Azure Blob Storage, it's working out really well. And I've been doing some testing. I haven't put out a video yet on my performance testing, but like a 3 meg file. So I was writing it straight to Azure Blob Storage or trying to write it straight to SQL. Was literally, not exaggerating, a timed number. It was a 10x difference in the amount of time that it took to go from one to the other. And you can guess which one of the ones was slower.
Yeah, and I mean, it's that whole thing. So before we were telling people, don't write your stuff to SharePoint lists, write it to SQL, Azure SQL, because if you write it to SharePoint, ultimately it gets saved to Azure SQL. Now we've just moved that up, and now we're saying, don't save it to Azure SQL, save it to Azure Blob Store, because when you're saving it to Azure SQL, it's just being written to a file system through the SQL engine. So just skip that middleman and just write it directly in, and it's a 10 times speed increase.
It's crazy, yeah. And just for those of you that are thinking about this conceptually, so then what we do is once we write it out to Azure Blob Storage, we're just grabbing that URL and we're storing that URL in SQL, so then we have access to it later. That also enables like Lori's stuff, Power BI. I know a lot of customers want to take PowerApps and front end data so that they can do Power BI reporting.
Right.
Power BI has a really hard time, dealing with the image files when they're stored in all these weird places. But if you're stored in Azure Blob Storage and here's the URL, Power BI does a really fast job of getting that image into your app or your report. So.
Excellent. Good find. Well, I'm sure your fans will look forward to the videos that you put out when you get a video around that.
Yeah. So and I have the first video that introduces you to signing up for an Azure Blob Storage account and getting connected. So that video is available. But the one
good.
on the performance comparisons and things like that, I'm trying to figure out all the ways that people are going to say that I'm not testing apples to apples. So I'm trying to get
people suck. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that I learned with that, which is probably completely obvious to you because you're smarter and better looking than I am.
I am.
But so storing to Azure SQL, with Azure SQL Database as a Service, you can control the size, right? There's a basic tier, which is like 5 DTUs, and then you get the standard where you can kind of slide the DTUs. So changing the DTUs not only changes like the capacity and the, like they say it changes the performance, but when you're doing a bunch of like normal SQL queries, you don't really understand that. Yeah. Saving files out there, which is a terribly long query, you can see a really drastic difference as you move up the tiers. So my 10x difference was on that really low bottom tier. But if I jumped out to the database that costs like $50 or $70 a month, I forget what it is, that one of those more expensive DTU databases, that load time got down to only like 3 or 4 times slower than Azure Blob Storage. So I had never really thought about the DTUs really affecting the performance of a single transaction as much as thinking about it affecting the amount of transactions it could do. But it turns out that that slider also controls the speed at which your SQL runs. So
yeah, and I think Microsoft has been sort of opaque on what all a DTU is. What data transfer unit or something? I forget what the acronym is. But it's just a performance thing. But they've been pretty opaque about what it means on the back end and what it means on the front end. Just, they've been, if you need better performance, And so I'm guessing at some point through that slider in the back end, you started out with super slow disks. And then when you got to the top end, you got to the fastest SSDs that they had possible. And that, I mean, there's other things. There's going to be more cores and more RAM, but I think that's probably a piece of it too. So that's why you notice it with the files.
Yeah. So I don't know. I thought that was a fun little tidbit, though. Getting to play with some of the Azure pieces. Right? I don't get to play in Azure nearly as much as I'd like, but so when I get a chance to do Azure storage accounts or Azure Database as a Service as part of my PowerApps job, it's pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, I don't get to play in Azure as much as I should either. And when I was doing this user property thing with the customer, I was kind of walking through where the properties were and all that. And I popped into Azure Active Directory to look at some stuff. And I'm like, oh, there's so many things in here that I keep wanting to click. Because, you pop out of the Office 365 stuff and then you're into the Azure. And it's a little different. It's obviously a different product. I'm like, oh, it reminds me. I kept wanting to look at this and this and this because now I'm in Azure land and all these Azure things keep coming back to me. So I get that.
Yeah. All right, last thing on PowerApps. Remember my PowerApps and Flow trainings coming up February 21st or February 25th to the 28th. It's made for app builders, people who have kind of want to get in there and do some fun stuff. If you mention that Todd is ugly, I will give you guys a 10% off discount. So just when you fill out the form, just put in the comments, Todd is ugly, and a free 10% off. But the class has been filling up the last couple of times. So if you're thinking about it, you might want to get in a little sooner than later, especially now that the code is out. The people know. So
The carry, yeah, and you don't have to worry about spaces or not. Or he's got all kinds of code in there to make sure that whatever you put in, if he can cobble it together to spell Todd is ugly, he will do it. So yeah,
I'm pretty good at string functions. So
yeah. Spaces, no spaces, caps, all caps, no caps. The title case doesn't matter. So tell us the sad story about Vader, about your Tesla.
yeah, my poor Tesla. She so one of the features that it has that I would say most cars of a certain stature have, right, is the idea that the mirrors fold in and out automatically when you park or leave the car.
Yep.
Not a really overwhelming feature, but a couple days ago, mine as it started to when it opened up, it actually opened up too far.
Oh.
That's really annoying, right? You can't. Turns out rearview mirrors don't work if they're an inch out, the wrong, off by an angle. So I had to take her in this morning to get that repaired because when I closed them, so I was like, all right, just hit the button, maybe they'll kind of reset.
Yeah.
It came in and then it went snap, and then all of a sudden it was a dangling participle. It was like, and it just kind of started doing this little number. So whatever the mechanism or gear inside there was, it just broke in half. It was super cold, so I don't know if the cold's what got it, right? These California cars sometimes don't love the cold.
Which I'm totally with you, but it's funny because Norway is like the biggest place that buys Teslas, and it gets cold in Norway, so I'm surprised that they haven't worked through this already. But yeah,
but I mean, like when you look at the features and the way that it handles like cold weather situations, right? You can clearly tell someone in California who has never been in the cold in their entire life kind of got to determine how some of these features worked.
Yeah, but cold. So I totally agree with you. But cold has always been tough on cars. Like I had a car when I was in college where the factory radio screen literally would freeze when it was cold, and so you couldn't see anything until it warmed up. The transmission wouldn't go in reverse when it was. I mean, so this is not Tesla specific. That was not a great car, but
we all had that first car that the cold was like just meant the car didn't work.
Yep. Sadly, this is like my third car.
I can't help it that you didn't accelerate through the cars.
Yeah, this car did not accelerate either. So the cold, but you said it's fixed now. You took it in.
Well, so they've got it right now. I'm getting the yearly service as well, but because I skipped the first one, we just went straight to the second yearly service, which is, I don't know about you, right? But I drive my car way too much.
See, I would argue I don't get to drive my car enough.
But so, I've had the car for almost a year and a half, a little shy of that. And I think, it's not terrible. It's like 23,000 miles on already. Like, that's, my minivan they've had for 3 years barely has 20,000 miles on it. So I think you need to quit driving the Tesla so much.
I got mine 8 months ago and I've put 14,000 miles on it.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. So speaking of, I took ours to Kansas City the last 2 weekends as we've gone to these games that have been brutally cold, and you just don't think about it, but the cold really impacts batteries, and we're talking cell phone batteries and laptop batteries and whatever. But when it's in your car, it really matters. And we've only had maybe 3 cold spells since I've gotten my car, so I just have not completely thought through all that. Last weekend when we came home, we stopped at a charger in Bethany, Missouri and charged, and I felt like we charged longer than we needed to. But we wanted to be safe. When we rolled into the garage, we had 9 miles of range left. So this week we did a much better job when we went down planning all of that. One thing that's interesting, Arrowhead Stadium has electric car chargers, has 2 banks of them.
Nice.
So if you know where they're at and know to ask the parking attendants when you come in, they've got 2 places where you can charge your car. So that is something that I don't do enough, but when I go to places with parking lots, and I think I talked about this in December when I went up to Minneapolis and left my car there for 8 days when I was in Europe, they have car chargers in there. So my car sat on a charger the whole time it was gone.
And so I know no one else cares about this, but we're going to talk about it anyway. I really struggle with the airport charger model, right? So our airport has probably 20, maybe 15 spaces have chargers associated with them.
Sure.
And they're pretty prime spots, right? They're up front. They're a nice place to park. But I don't feel right just when I show up at the airport with my car, like I'm gonna go sit here and take one of these spots and sit in that spot for 5 days, because I feel like that's depriving anyone else of using that charger for the next 5 days, and it doesn't seem right to me. I don't know. I struggle.
Oh, so if you are not going to use it, who do you think is going to?
So in my head, the way they should be is they should be sitting there for someone who, when they return from their trip, if they don't have enough juice, they could charge so they could make it to, their next appropriate charger.
Okay. So how fast, what chargers do they have at CVG
I've
then?
never even plugged in, but they're the crappy ones, right? They're probably going to
Right.
be 20 miles again, 20 miles an hour type of stuff.
Right. So that is not who's going to park there. Because, supercharger, yes. Level 2, no. So I struggle with the same thing. At MSP, they are not the prime spots. They are on the penultimate level of the parking ramp. So it's, 7th out of 8 floor, something like that. So it's not that. But I thought about that too. I'm like, man, my thing's going to sit here for 8 days. But that's exactly who these are for. Like they're not fast chargers. So it's not somebody whose car is a little low and wants to top it off or get a little bit before they leave. Nobody who's coming home from Europe or Atlanta wants to take their car and then drive down and sit on a charger for 2 hours to get 40 miles of range. Like that's not the target audience.
And I agree, but at the same time, I really struggle with this idea that my car has now made it so no one else can charge. If they really had to have a charge to get home,
yeah. Well, and I guess the other thing is, I've never gone to one of these where they were full. Like so MSP has 2 banks of 8. I've only ever gone to 1. But when I got there, I was the 3rd of 8 that pulled in. And when I left, there was 3 there. So I was the 4th of 8 when I left. So there was 5 spots open when I got there after I plugged in and 5 spots when I left. I'm like, that feels, my conscience is clear.
So Cincinnati, they're always full. I mean, there might be, so like this last 2 trips, I could have gotten a spot. There was 1 spot, but I just felt like I don't need.
Yeah.
So I didn't use them, but I don't know. I don't struggle. I realize that if no one else has spent as much time thinking about this as we have, but
no, they should. And I guess the thing is, so if Des Moines had them, and I was topped off here, and I was only going to be flying for 3 days, and I knew that when I landed, I would have 200 miles of range for my 43-mile drive home, I probably wouldn't do it because I don't need it. But in Minneapolis, when I was going to sit for 8 days and lose 100 miles of charge, and it was the difference between me making it home with 1 stop or 2, I felt okay with it.
No, I get it. I don't. I think what I'm really trying to say is I don't think the way that it's currently implemented is correct. I mean, I think you're using it correctly for the way it is currently implemented, but I don't think the current implementation is right for the long. Imagine when half the people in that garage are driving an electric car. Now what the heck?
They'll put in more chargers, or they'll just not do it anymore. Yeah. I mean, that's and I guess so. When I really had to confront this was there's a hotel in Minneapolis that I stayed at that has chargers. And it was a level 2 charger. So again, 20 miles thing. And I felt the same way. I'm like, man, I feel bad because I'm gonna hook my car up to this, but it's not a fast charge. So it's not like I'm going to sit in it and wait for it to get full. But I'm like, yeah, this trickle charge is exactly what they plan it for. You park your car there. It's a parking spot and you leave it there. My car got finished charging at like 2:00 in the morning. So it only really idled there, but there was always open spots. And I don't know when electric cars become a bigger thing, I'll probably change my view, but
I guess I'd be curious how the people. Right, we need to get an expert from LA, right, where they're very prevalent. How does their airport work when it comes to this?
Well, I think, but I think that's different. Like, I don't think rules that apply in densely populated areas should apply to sparsely populated areas.
And I don't think it's the rules. I just want to understand how they're handling the situation, right? Because they are us fast forwarded. Yeah, they are all ready to shoot each other. They don't have guns, thank goodness, out there. So
yeah. So got that. Am I Tesla? So for those of you that have Teslas, if anybody's listening to this, I use the website Teslafy.com. And that gives me all the stats so I could see when I drove home, I was at 63% efficiency, and I could see when the battery warmers kick in and all that. Very great tool. Highly recommend it. If you do it, if you go to Teslafy.com and sign up, if you use my name with no spaces, Todd Clint, you get an extra 2 weeks or something in your trial, and I get $5. But great. It's like all the data nerd stuff. It's graphs, it's maps. I just eat that stuff up. I love it.
All right, we probably have time for one more of my random ideas. Since do you have any? Which one of those things would you like to converse about?
So tell us about your Unify security gateway. I think we've talked about that a little bit more.
So I have not put him in yet, but he is right here in my hand. So we purchased you're kind of like down here, but
there we go.
I bought the Unify Security Gateway because my goal is still, as we've talked about several times, I got to get this house network better segmented between me and the kids, and I put in the Unify access points, which work great, other than I still have that whole cloud controller thing. I should buy one of those, but I haven't.
Yep.
But yeah, so I think the idea with the Unified Gateway is it'll just plug right in that software so then you can get, more information. But unlike, typically, 2 years ago, if I was going to do this, I was just going to buy a wireless router, right? That's going to be my internet point, is going to be my my access point, is going to be everything to everybody. And so now I'm trying to really build my network out here at home in a more professional manner so that I can kind of control, because the ultimate goal, the wife keeps reminding me, is that we want to get that Disney Circle, stupid, terrible device, back on the network for the kids side of it. So how do I get them into the network without it affecting me?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I'm looking forward to putting this in, but I still don't completely know how I'm going to wire things up.
And what's that going to do? So that's going to be your router and your NAT and all that?
Yes.
Okay. What security stuff? It's got the name security. It's got the word security in its name. What security things will it do? So
I believe it's, and I didn't research it as much as I should have, honestly. But I believe that it gets into the port forwarding stuff and things like that, right? So the router solutions do not. Okay. And I believe it also does the VLANs and things. So it adds that kind of, it takes just a simple edge router, which I think is what you've got. It kind of adds that next tier of software to get in there and start, driving traffic if you want in specific ways, letting people in. So if I decided to put the thing I use, the Tableau, if I decided to put the Tableau back on the network, or on the internet, that type of stuff. So.
Gotcha. Well, I look forward to hearing about that. I also have the Unify stuff, so.
Yeah, I still, I don't know. I think the way we're going to end up, I'm going to try to do the network is make it basically, if you're on the wireless, that has to go through the Disney Circle, right? If you guys remember when we talked about the Disney Circle, the way it does the whole man in the middle, I call it man in the middle attack, but it takes over 10.0.0.1. It does Mac spoofing, so it can route all the traffic through it, which is great to control my kids in their YouTube videos, but it really messes up things like the show here where Todd and I are trying to chat with each other in real time. Turns out having the Disney Circle at 100 megabit and its 100 megabit connection kind of drags down my network. So
yeah, and especially for me, because my internet connection is far greater than 100 megabits, so that makes a huge bottleneck.
So in my head, somehow, some way, I'm going to be able to figure out to put the access points and the circle into one segment, and then all the wired, because like the PC that I'm on right now to do the show is hardwired, and so to make it so all the hardwired can get out directly. Yeah. But I'm certain it's going to bite me in the butt 7 different times because I'm a pretend networking guru. So
for me, it would be anytime I wanted to use my tablets or wireless devices, then my stuff would go through the Circle, and I would not want to be subject to the same restrictions my kids had.
Well, so with the Circle, though, you can set profiles. So I can say my device doesn't,
But you're still throttled to 100 megabit wireless.
Yes. Yeah. But I mean, let's be honest, our devices are not running it faster than that for any more than maybe a burst, right? That is not really a bottleneck for wireless.
Yeah.
Unless you're sitting there beside the wireless adapter with your phone, like, look at me, I got it.
Not your phone. My phone, maybe. Not your phone.
Yeah, my poor phone.
All right, let's take it on home now. For the community stuff, I got an email a couple days ago about SharePoint Saturday, Kansas City. That is October 19th. I've already signed up for that. I've got the link in the show notes. That will be in Overland Park, Kansas. I don't know if I'm just going to be an attendee like I was last time or if I'm going to participate at all, but if there's a SharePoint Saturday within a couple hours of me, I like to go. So that will be going on. For our individual speaking things, you and I will be in SharePoint SP TechCon here in a couple of weeks, I guess, February 10th through the 13th in Austin. We're doing some sessions. I was going to do the all-day class with you, but I ended up having to fly out early, so I ditched you on that.
You haven't told me yet. How sad for me.
I did too. I emailed you about that. You said it was okay.
Oh, well, good me.
Very understanding of you. Yes. Yeah, no, I have to be. So that's on Tuesday, and I have to be home Tuesday night for something, and I couldn't. Or no, it was a session.
Yeah, you ditched me for a session, not the all day.
Okay, yes, okay. Never mind. False alarm. Whatever it was, you were very understanding. Very understanding about it. So we'll be there. All the crazy kids will be there. Be a good time. Come find us if you're there. And then I'm doing a talk for the Kansas City user group on Monday, March 11th. I think I'm gonna drive down for that one. Another way to get extra miles on the old Tesla. So I'll be speaking about groups there, I think. So if you're going to be in the Kansas City area, sign up for that one. And then you and I will both be at the North American Collaboration Summit later that week in Branson. So you can go to collabsummit.org, I believe is the URL for that one.
Yeah, we've had a busy
Busy March. Holy cow, yeah. And then you and I will be at SharePoint Saturday, Omaha on March 30th. Doing what? I don't remember. We need to talk about those travel plans. Then like that day or the next day, I'm going to fly to Sweden on April 1st for the SharePoint Exchange Forum over there. Then in May, the SharePoint Conference. Just a busy spring.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just sad and exhausted just listening to you go through that. Like, I wanted to chime in, but I was just too busy being depressed about all the travel because I don't know if you guys have ever met me, but I don't really like to go places.
He doesn't. No. Yeah, I feel bad paying for this house in March because I don't think I'm going to sleep there much.
Me neither. At least your kids will have somewhere, you know. Wife, the boyfriend. I mean,
whoever, milkman. Yeah, it doesn't matter. But yeah, if you're going to be at any of those events, come find us. We're pretty friendly folks. We'd love to meet you. Shane's a little less grumpy in person, not a whole lot, but a little bit.
I'm taller in person. That's one of the things that people are always shocked by. Them. You know, you're so tall. I'm like, I mean, I don't know how to show you how tall I am on this video. So
I get that too, and I guess as I'm looking at my camera angle, I can see how it looks like I'm like 5'4", but I'm taller than that.
Well, the way your chair sits, right? Yeah, you kind of.
It does, and the camera's up, so it makes me look. I mean, the camera is, about up to there on me, so. Yeah.
So we need to get you a fancy desk like me, so you can stand up and have all the energy, all the moves.
I would like that. Yeah. So if I stand up, I look much taller.
Don't. Ah.
All right, everybody. Chat room. We're gonna stick around for a little bit, but I will get this podcast and last week's podcast out here in the next couple of days. So thanks, everybody, and we'll talk to you next week.
See you guys.